Welcome back to the Annals, where shame becomes legend and warriors never come quietly. Tonight, Episode 4, Battle Hard, in every sense, the Berserker Legends. We march into the north, into the frenzy, into the foam, and the filth of Berserkers. Men who tore at their shields with jaws of frenzy, screamed like wolves in rut, and toppled in the afterglow of slaughter. This isn't just a story of war. It's lust, it's rage, it's legendary. It's history foaming at the mouth and dripping into the annals. Tonight's disclaimer. The sagas tell us these stories, but sagas are gossip with better poetry. The chroniclers who recorded them had their own axes to grind and often their own shame, too. Some of what you'll hear tonight comes from archaeology, some from manuscripts, and some from the imagination of men who want you to believe the Berserkers were possessed by devils, demons, or just too much mead. So treat this like a feast. There's truth on the table, there's rumor in the cup, and there's more than a little filth baked into the bread. Eat and drink at your own peril, and remember, what's sacred in history is never safe in the annals. Pre-Act 1. Who were the Berserkers? Before we bare our teeth, let's set the scene. The Berserkers stormed out of the Viking Age, roughly the 8th through the 11th centuries, out of Norway, Iceland, Denmark, and Sweden. Lands of long winters, harsher gods, and sagas written in blood and body fluids we won't catalog here. They weren't ordinary fighters. They were Odin's wild cards, his drunk uncles at the family reunion who showed up shirtless, already bleeding, and ready to fight the furniture. The word berserker likely meant bear shirt or bearskin clad, because these maniacs wrapped themselves in animal hides before charging into battle. Though some scholars argue it meant bare-shirted, as in no armor, because why not make yourself more stab-friendly if you're already foaming at the mouth? These were Norse warriors who fought in a trance-like fury, a state they called Berserker gang. Equal parts blackout rage, divine possession, and Viking Viagra. Kings kept them close as bodyguards. Raiders shoved them to the front lines. Enemies cursed them as demons. And yet, to the Berserker himself, every brawl was a wager with eternity. If he fell with weapon in hand, the Valkyries would swoop in, divine Uber drivers with feathered wings, and carry him to Valhalla, Odin's frat house in the sky. There, the chosen dead drank endless mead, fought glorious battles every day, and feasted every night in the eternal after-party of the gods. That was the reward for a warrior's life, but the Berserkers weren't just conquerors. They were men who believed frenzy itself was a ticket to heaven's blood-drenched banquet. And tonight, we're peeling back the glory to expose the lust, the shame, and the spectacle that burned their legend into the annals. Act 1. The ecstasy of the Berserker gang. When the sagas describe Berserkers, they don't talk about military precision or chessboard tactics. They talk about men coming apart at the seams. Convulsing, snarling, faces blazing crimson like they'd just been caught mid-sin. Spit flew from twisted mouths, some gnawed wood until splinters shredded their gums. Others bit iron like it was foreplay with Thor. Eyes bugged, limbs rattled, voices crackled into animal howls. And then the collapse. Strings cut, meat hitting dirt. This wasn't strategy, this was a storm that rose and broke like sex. Rage swelling, sinews straining, throats bursting with moans that weren't entirely martial. And then the sudden drop. The sagas themselves admitted they lay weak and tame, as if utterly spent. Even the Norse, not exactly prudish, knew what they were seeing. A man burning like a god one moment, limp as a sodden rag the next. The body wrung dry, the spirit emptied. The Berserker gang was nothing less than an orgasm in armor. And their enemies saw it too. Oh, they loved writing about it. To them, this wasn't courage, it was corruption. Lust parading as valor. What looked like battle frenzy became something indecent. Groans blurred into moans. Spasms turned suggestive. Collapse stank of shame. The writhing warriors weren't heroes in the chronicles. They were cautionary tales, possessed meat puppets pantomiming sin on the battlefield. And here's the wicked twist. The Berserkers didn't hide it. They staged it. Picture the great hall, warriors standing tall, sipping their mead, while one man in the center shakes, shrieks, froths, and drops to the floor gasping like he just got raided in a very different way. The onlookers had to wonder, was this power from the gods or just desire in chainmail? The Annals answer? Both. The Berserker gang was rage climaxing a spectacle, the body betraying itself, heat breaking men in public, their glory tangled with shame. History remembers not just their triumphs, but the image burned into every witness of red faces, ragged throats, trembling bodies, and the battlefield littered with men sprawled like exhausted lovers after the last shudder. Act 2. Wolf and Bear Fetishism. The Berserker wasn't just a fighter, he was a man in costume, or better yet, a man in kink. The sagas tell us they stormed half-naked under wolf hides or bear pelts, smeared in blood, nipples catching the torchlight, eyes rolling like they'd just been touched by something unholy. To their enemies, it was terror. To us, it's furry cosplay with a murder boner. A bear skin won't stop a spear. A wolf pelt won't block a sword. What it did was transform them. Slip into the hide and you weren't just Olaf the farm boy anymore. You were predator, brute, rutting beast. It was the Norse metamorphosis ritual. Not man into god, but man into animal. Initiation sealed the kink too. Picture it, a smoky hall, torches guttering, sweat dripping off beards into mead horns. A trembling youth kneels as the wolf skin drops across his shoulders. The crowd pounds the tables, howling in rhythm until he joins the chorus. That first howl wasn't his debut, it was his baptism. No priest, no hymn, just fur, blood, and the roar of men in heat. And wolves and bears weren't just strong, they were horny. Wolves mount often and loudly, bears mount with terrifying force. Wearing those skins wasn't just about protection, it was about appetite. Put on the hide and you weren't just fighting like them, you were taking their hungers into your own body. It wasn't armor, it was a kink suit. Of course, later chroniclers spun this into slander. They said berserkers were wolfmen rutting through villages, bears that didn't stop at clawing. Sure, they exaggerated, but exaggeration needs a seed. And that seed was the real. They wore the hides, they howled, they lost themselves in frenzy. Lust was always woven in, the chroniclers just stripped it naked. So don't picture just a soldier. Picture a fetishist, sweat dripping, fur clinging, chest heaving, eyes rolled back, howling like a beast in rut. A man who stepped onto the battlefield already halfway to climax, because in his mind, the wolf wasn't just on his back, it was inside him. He was the wolf. Act 3. Drugs, Drink, and Desire. The fury of the berserkers may not have come from rage alone. The sagas describe fits so violent, bodies shaking, lips frothing, eyes glassed with madness, that they read less like battle reports and more like bad trip diaries. And archaeology hints at their secret stash. In a Viking woman's grave at Fyrkat, Denmark, they found seeds of henbane. Not food, not medicine. A poison plant turned potion. Brew it into ale and the drinker's skin goes scarlet. The heart jackhammers, the mind fractures. You stumble, you lash out, you even hallucinate. Brothers became bulls, friends become foes. A berserker high on henbane wasn't just angry, he was delirious. A Norse acid casualty with a broadsword. The symptoms fit too perfectly. Wild cries, foam at the mouth, blows so frenzied they couldn't be aimed. Picture a war band storming into a village, pupils blown wide, sweat slicking their torsos, faces red as boiled lobsters, weapons jerking in spasmodic rhythm. Less battlefield, more nightmare carnival. And henbane came with a bonus side effect, heat. The plant flushed more than just faces. Some accounts hint at it working like a primitive aphrodisiac. blood surging into all the extremities. Now imagine it again. Warriors staggering forward, swords swinging, erections tenting wolf pelts, their bodies confused by lust and rage until the two become indistinguishable. Widow or warrior, bride or bannerman, in that haze, the line blurred. Mead poured like gasoline on the fire. Viking feast drowned in it. Mix honey ale with henbane and you didn't just have soldiers, you had a pagan rave. A hall shaking with drum beats. 20 men painted red in firelight, stamping, roaring, sweat flying, blades crashing to the same rhythm. To them it was divine power. To onlookers it was terror in human skin. The chroniclers didn't need to embellish much, but of course they did anyway. They wrote of men possessed, rutting and killing in the same breath. Satan's shock troops in fur and steel, and yet peel back the demon mask, and the bone of truth remained. Intoxicated men driven into frenzy. Violence braided tight with lust until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. And when the blaze guttered out, collapse. The sagas relished the moment. Men once unstoppable now sprawled in the dirt, weak and tame, limp as lovers after the last shudder. The frenzy wasn't a steady flame, it was a flashbang orgasm. Glorious, consuming, then gone, leaving only ash, exhaustion, and shame. So don't picture berserkers as sober tacticians only. Picture them as intoxicated predators, mead in their belly, henbane in their blood, lust in their loins. Their battlefield wasn't just war, it was rave, ritual, and release. The only way to burn so bright, even if it meant burning out. Alright, scroll sniffers, time for a quick raid through the merch haul. You've heard of berserkers foaming at the mouth? Well, now you can foam at the coffee. That's right, our mugs and shirts are waiting for you on Etsy. Maybe you want to declare your mornings with mead plus mushrooms equal Valhalla. The perfect reminder that your third cup of coffee is basically a berserker gang. Or maybe you're more of a feast crasher type, in which case, Berserkers, Wedding Crasher Original. We'll tell everyone at brunch exactly why you weren't invited in the first place. Every piece in the Annals shop is made to keep history just as filthy as we tell it here. So head to Etsy, search One Up the Annals, and claim your loot, because shame fades, but mugs last forever. Act 4, Bride Snatchers of the North. Berserkers weren't just nightmares on the battlefield. They were the curse of the feast hall, swaggering in uninvited, reeking of sweat and mead, eyes glazed like pickled onions, voices booming like drunks at last call. The sagas don't flatter them. These weren't noble champions. They were bullies who could turn a wedding into a hostage situation before the soup was served. And weddings were their favorite hunting ground. The halls glow with torchlight, music lifting, the bride radiant in silk and promise. Then the doors slam open. In lumbers a berserker, chest bare beneath a matted pelt, saliva glistening down his beard like a bad toast. He slams his fist on the table, points at the groom, and demands satisfaction. And here's the kicker. The weapon wasn't just his axe, it was the law. Viking culture sanctioned holmgang, duels to settle disputes. Land, honor, or brides. If the groom fought and lost, his body bled into the rushes and the berserker hauled off the bride like a prize pig. If the groom refused, shame chewed him alive. Either way, the berserker left with spoils. Legalized theft dressed up as honor. Imagine it, the vows unsaid, the groom forced into combat on his own wedding night. Guests shrieking, benches splintering, the bride dragged through a slurry of mead and blood while the berserker howled his victory. It wasn't love, it wasn't war, it was ritualized abduction. Norse Tinder, but with more homicide. The sagas are littered with these rumorous tales. A handful of grooms fought like heroes and kept their brides. Most did not. The lesson was clear. Berserkers didn't just raid villages, they raided families. To let one through your hall doors was to risk humiliation, ruin, and your daughter carried off on a technicality. Eventually outlawry came. Royal decrees naming berserkers as criminals. But too late to erase the stains. The memory lingered of men who could stride into a marriage feast and tear it apart with nothing more than a grin and a duel clause. That's their legacy. Not just warriors of the wild, but wedding crashers from hell. The original ruiners of matrimony, turning till death do us part into till Berserker kicks in the door. In the Annals, they stand tall as history's filthiest gatecrashers, horny, howling, and armed with both law and lust. Act 5. Brotherhood, Sweat, and Shame. On the field, Berserkers weren't lone wolves. They slammed shoulder to shoulder in the shield wall, half naked, skin slick with sweat, blood streaking their arms, heat rising off them like steam in a bathhouse. Every shove rippled down the line, bodies colliding, breath mixing, frenzy shared like a fever. It wasn't formation, it was intimacy and chaos. And from that closeness came bonds deeper than blood. Men swore themselves oath brothers, companions bound to fight, feast, and die together. The sagas make it sound noble, loyalty forged hotter than iron. But listen close. If you hear the whisper, what else did those bonds contain when men lived pressed so tight, panting, trembling, roaring in unison? The Norse weren't shy about sex, but the code was cruel. Desire wasn't the sin, position was. To thrust was dominance, to yield was shame. The word was urgy, the filthiest stain a man could bear. You could swing a sword and roar like a god, but if someone marked you as the woman in that equation, your honor bled out faster than any gut wound. The law made it literal. The Icelandic Gragas listed the top humiliations: castration, brain wounds, belly punctures, and nestled in there was the clam hog, the shame stroke, a cut across the buttocks, not just an injury, but a scar branding the victim as passive, the butt of the joke forever. Now drop that onto the Berserker, the man already shaking, frothing, writhing for all to see. To his brothers it was camaraderie, shared frenzy. To enemies it was easy mockery. Look, the beast loves the press of men. One insult, one scar in the wrong place, and the warrior became the punchline of his own legend. That's why slander was sharper than steel. Clerics, rivals, poets, they all took their swing. They accused berserkers of lusting in the shield wall, of rutting under the pelts, of taking the frenzy too far. The words didn't just mock, they unmanned. A sword strike healed, a rumor festered. And that's the paradox. The berserker, feared for his wildest strength, was most vulnerable to the softest rumor. A whisper could drop him lower than any axe. The saga remembers both sides, the sweat, the roar, the intimacy of brothers pressed tight in battle, and the dread that shame would undo it all. That's the Annals' edge. Men who burned bright in frenzy, then bled out in reputation. Brotherhood dripping with sweat, legends carved not just with steel, but with humiliation. The wildest warriors of the North, undone as much by rumor as by ruin. Act 6. Runes, Sexting, and the Phallic Cult. The Vikings carved their world into wood, stone, and bone. Runes weren't just letters, they were incantations, charms, little shards of magic. But the sacred alphabet couldn't escape human nature. Archaeologists in Norway dug up a stick from the 12th century etched with, and you know I love these little quotes through time and history. This one said, "Monstrous is the cunt, may the penis serve it." That's not prophecy, that's sexting. 1,000-year-old dirty DMs scratched into wood and slipped in the pocket. Pompeii had graffiti of cocks the size of galleys. The Norse answered with rune smut, portable porn disguised as prayer sticks. And then comes the saga the monks desperately wanted to suppress but couldn't stop giggling over. Volsa pater, the tale of the penis. A family keeps a horse phallus swaddled in linen like a relic. They name it Volsi. Every meal they pass it around. Each member recites a verse, handling it, stroking it, kissing it, offering it prayers. Fertility rite? Dinner theater? Who cares? The saga is clear. In that house, devotion meant literally blessing the sausage before supper. Now fold that into the Berserkers' world. War bands high on henbane, sweating beneath wolf pelts, eyes wild with frenzy. If farmers were fondling horsecock at the dinner table, what the hell were the Berserkers doing in their rituals before a raid? Some chroniclers whispered that warriors carved runes into their own erections, treating their flesh as living talismans. A spell you could swing, magic etched into meat. Whether fact or smear doesn't matter. The rumor itself shows just how blurred the Norse lines were between worship, magic, and filth. For the Vikings, sexuality wasn't hidden, it was inscribed. They carved lust into wood, stone, saga, and rumor alike. The sagas preserved the frenzy, the laws preserved the shame, and the artifacts preserved this. Even in their most sacred letters, they honored the obscene. So again, when you picture a berserker, don't just see a foaming warrior with a sword in hand. Picture the other weapon, carved, blessed, swinging free. Because in the Viking world, power wasn't measured only in steel and shields. It was in jokes scratched on sticks, rituals passed around the table, and relics throbbing with a kind of pagan magic. Lust itself as sacrament. Act 7, Highs vs. Lows, Outlawry and Collapse. For centuries, berserkers were storms in human skin, hired by kings, feared by enemies, immortalized in sagas. At their peak, they were untouchable, men who surged into combat like living fire, impervious to iron, immune to fear, raging until the world bent to their will. That was their high, that was their ecstasy. That was the legend that burned their name into eternity. But the high always had a shadow. The rage didn't fade, it snapped. One heartbeat they were roaring like gods, the next they were sprawled on the earth, limp and emptied. The sagas politely call it weak and tame, but some modern eyes see the outlines of something darker. Trauma cycling through a body, tremors, hollow stares, collapse into silence. Less victory feast, more panic attack aftermath. The god mask ripped off, leaving only the wreck. And here's the cruel irony. What they thought was divine frenzy may have been their undoing. The plants, the potions, the mead. Maybe they were to smother the aftermath, to blur grief, to dull loss. To quiet the screaming silence once the slaughter ended. Rage became both poison and cure. Highs to escape the lows. Addiction braided tight with trauma until one bled into the other. Eventually society had enough. By the 12th century, law codes turned cold. Going berserk wasn't holy anymore, it was a crime. No more blood-drunk duels in mead halls, no more brides snatched under torchlight, no more howling your lust into the rafters and calling it Odin's gift. Outlawry stripped them of the last shred of protection. The wolf skins rotted, the bear hides disappeared. Frenzy itself was banished, surviving only a story. And yet the sagas refused to let them die clean. They remembered both sides. The highs, teeth snapping, eyes blazing, men aflame with ecstasy. And the lows? Trembling wrecks, outcast, drained and broken, haunted even in their sleep. The berserker's life was a pendulum, soaring to Valhalla one moment, crashing into humiliation the next. Act 8, Lust, Trauma, and the Echo of Battle. Strip away the sagas and what's left is the body, shaking, heaving, breaking. Modern eyes can see what the poets only hinted at. These weren't just warriors of ecstasy. They were men riding trauma in real time. The Berserker gang, the frenzy, reads today like an extreme stress response. A flash of adrenaline so violent it looked divine. A collapse so total it looked cursed. Every detail lines up. Today we'd call it post-traumatic stress. Back then, they called it Odin's gift. But here's where the Annals lean in. The Norse never split lust from frenzy. The same flush that heated their skin in war heated their feasts, their rites, their beds. Mead, henbane, mushrooms, the clash of steel all drove blood to the same places. For the berserker, the body became a stage where lust and trauma played the same tune. And maybe that's why the frenzy endured in legend, because everyone recognized the cycle. The high of release, the shame of collapse, the desperate chase for the next high to blot out the silence. Was it addiction? Was it survival? Or was it simply the oldest human truth, that lust and violence both burn brightest when they flirt with self-destruction? The Annals don't mock that. They honor it. The Berserker wasn't just a caricature of rage. He was a man caught in the paradox of being human. The body is weapon, the body is wound. His lust, his frenzy, his collapse. Not sideshows, but symptoms. The cost of burning too hot, too fast, for too long. So when we write him here, we don't just remember the spectacle. We remember the echo. The red flush, the shaking hands, the collapse that looked too much like a lover spent or a man broken. That echo is the sound of trauma, carved in saga, carved in bone, carved in the annals forever. So what are the Berserkers in the end? Were they Odin's chosen, riding the high of frenzy until the world itself bent to their howls? Or were they men broken by the crash, trembling in shame, chasing the next high just to escape the silence? That's the eternal verses, the pre-battle ecstasy that made them gods, against the post-battle lows that made them outlaws. The sagas remembered both, the shield-biting highs, the shame-soaked lows, the lust, the trauma, the collapse. And now it's etched here too, because in the annals, no frenzy is forgotten. Where shame becomes legend, I came for the facts, you stayed for the filth, and now it's in the annals. Good night.